Hello, everyone. My name is Pearl Ndlovu, and welcome to the Summit QCTO Insider. Here to provide you with more information regarding all things QCTO, I'm joined by Matt Lambert from Reach Summit Global and Andrea Kellett from Thrive. I'll start with Matt.
Thank you, Pearl. I always thought ladies should go first, but I'm willing to. What's it? Beast before beauty. So I'll go. So my name's Matt Lambert, as Pearl highlighted, and I'm the managing director of Summit. And the key reason for us being here today is myself and Andrea is just to discuss some of the elements and mechanics around the QCTO, some of the practical elements, some of the elements that would affect obviously employers as well, and just bringing them to light and sharing the information so both our clients as well as individuals partaking in QCTO programs potentially in the future have the relevant information to be able to make informed decisions. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea, over to you, and if you'd like to briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name's Andrea. I'm co-founder of Thrive, and for 20 years now, we've been working in the educational compliance space. So we've been helping providers with their accreditations and aligning to the NQF, previously with the SETAs, and now, of course, with the QCTO. And I'm delighted to be here to share information, to provide some opinions and some insights, really with the same intention to just spread information, correct information, and helping everybody just to transition in this very fluid space at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt and Andrea. We're all gearing up for the new QCTO framework that seemed to be taking our industry by storm. Funny enough, it's not all new. And Andrea, could you give us a quick rundown of how we ended up here?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I pulled up a very official statement over here so that I could share that with you. QCTO was in fact started, QCTO standing for the Quality Council for Trade and Occupations, was established in 2010 already, which is quite some time ago now, in terms of the Skills Development Act 97 of 98. Its role, and this is straight from the QCTO website, its role is to oversee the design, the implementation, the assessment, and the certification of occupational qualifications, including trades, on the occupational sub-framework. I'm going to unpack that for you in a sec. The QCTO also offers guidance to skills development providers, that's our training providers, who must be accredited by the QCTO to offer these qualifications. And so really, we have a statutory body, they are the Quality Council, and they are focused on what we call the occupational qualifications framework. So you might know that we have a higher education and a lower education, where Umalusi and the Council for Higher Education are the quality councils. What we're talking about today is really QCTO, which is on the occupational qualifications framework. And by occupation, we mean qualifications that lead to a specific job. It's very job focused. And you'll see in the occupational certificates that they're very focused on that. Now, previously, we would go to one of the 21 different SETAs to apply for accreditation if we were a provider. So we go to the SETA where most of our training lies. We no longer do that. That has transitioned across. And now if you're a skills development provider, one would go to the QCTO. So we're going to be hearing a lot about this as we go forward, as well as some of the challenges of any system in transition like this. So yeah, it's great that you're here so that we can talk through that. I don't know if that captures it for you, Pearl.
Absolutely captured, in fact, well captured. And it sounds like there's a lot of change that has already been happening, but even more headed in our direction, in everybody's direction. I want to hear from Matt. Matt, what's your take on the major changes we can expect by June 30th of 2024?
Oh, that's a loaded question, Phil. No, but obviously, I guess some of the obvious ones is essentially that, as we've highlighted from the fact that we're shifting over to the occupational-based qualifications, is our legacy-based qualifications will effectively come to an end, and essentially at this point in time, as far as we're aware, come to an end as 30th of June 2024. And that will be, when I say come to an end, I should be very clear and say registration of these programs would effectively come to an end on 30th of June 2024. However, maybe a caveat to that is, depending on the different SETAs, etc., learners may need to be registered effectively a month before that. So, you may find in many cases that the 30th of May 2024 is actually the last date in which you could apply for letters of intent for these legacy-based qualifications. And then depending on the duration of the particular program, you will then have a teacher out period of these qualifications. Depending on, like I said, the length of the program, it could be anywhere from a year to 3 years. So those are really, in terms of the legacy-based programs, really the fact around those. And then obviously, as Andrea's highlighted, is then the shift to the occupational-based qualifications, which then, in terms of what is required for those particular qualifications from a registration perspective, to a lesser and larger degree, depends on the quality assurance providers, which is now where the SETAs come into play, which Andrea will speak to. And those are, like I said, from a legacy-based perspective and teach-out period, which are kind of the key elements that I know you wanted to focus on, that will occur as of the 30th of June. And like I said, once again, highlighting that for many of the various sector education training authorities, learners, or there has to be a letter of intent issued for the registration of learners a month before that. So effectively the 30th of May 2024 for many of the sector education training authority letters of intent. So yeah, that's very brief, Pearl. There's a lot more to it than that, but obviously we'll touch on specific elements of it as we go through.
Absolutely. And it sounds like the 30th of June will be the birth of a new legacy, I guess. Thanks, Matt. Andrea, does this mean that the QCTO replaces the SETAs? Will the SETAs continue to exist?
So this is a common misunderstanding about this new system. Our SETAs, as we have them, are gazetted until 2030. So the SETAs in themselves are not going anywhere. And that's because SETAs do two main jobs, not just the accreditation of providers that like they used to do in the past, but they also have a mandate to identify and address skills needs within their particular sector. Now they do this through research projects, their sector skills plans. They do it through us reporting to them on our skills plans as organizations. So we put in our skills plans for mandatory grants once a year. They collect all of this information, they analyze it, and they identify skills gaps, and then offer discretionary funding and help set up learnerships and these kinds of things to address those skills needs. Now, that SETA role is going to continue. So we will continue to pay skills development levies and submit our WSPs to our SETAs for the foreseeable future. We don't see any shift in that. Where we do see a shift is, of course, they no longer do accreditations. However, they are now known as what's called the Assessment Quality Partners, the AQPs, and assisting the QCTO with some of the site visits, with some of the support, with some of the certifications, certainly the creation of what's now known as an ISA, the External Integrated Summative Assessment. They will assist with the writing of the ISAs, and so their role is really shifting in that space, but they are here to stay. We don't anticipate any, certainly they're not going anywhere.
Sigh of relief for many, I hope. Thank you so much, Andrea. Matt, how do you foresee QCTO benefiting our learners? And this is a twofold question. The second part being, and how does the assessment process work?
No, thanks, Pearl. So I'll tackle obviously your first question first. And speaking about how it will benefit learners, we actually briefly before jumping on and recording this, Andrea and I had a chat about there are obviously, as we discussed, there's some current challenges in respect of QCTO. But one of the really exciting things, I believe, from a QCTO-based perspective is if you look at the qualifications and how they've been structured, is if you look from a learner's perspective, is they're very focused on transferring the technical skill set that's required for a particular role. And what we see is the not necessarily the introduction, but I'd say a proliferation of part qualifications. So shorter based programs on the QCTO framework that really tackle specific skill sets and transfer them in typically a slightly shorter based time frame than legacy qualifications, which is great, because ultimately what we really want from a learner's perspective is for them to gain a skill set and ultimately in the shortest but most necessary time period that's required, and then enter into the workplace with that required skill set. So from that perspective, I really think it will benefit learners, and is great, like I said, to get that skill set straight into the workplace in a shorter duration time frame, which I think benefits everyone, which is really great. And then to your second question in terms of assessments. Now, for me, being a simple person, being more of a finance person, I needed to understand, well, how does it differ to a degree from a legacy-based environment? And really, fundamentally, as I see it, and while I might be wrong in certain areas, but as I see it, we've got effectively, if you look at it, you've got skills programs on the QCTO-based framework, then you've got part qualifications, and then you've got a qualification. Now, if you look at why I'm defining those three elements, is that there's effectively different assessment criteria required for each of those. Well, for each of the three, but two are essentially lumped together, and I'll get to that. So if we start at the start and look at a skills program, what we find there is we find a very similar methodology in respect of what we understand from a legacy-based perspective, where essentially the formative and summative assessment is done by the skills development provider. Okay, so and then they do that on the skills programs, and then effectively would issue as the skills provider a statement of results. Okay, and that statement of results, which historically would typically come from the Sector Education Training Authority, would now come from the skills development provider. However, the quality assurance process, as highlighted from Andrea earlier, is in relation to the skills program, where typically we understand in the SETA environment, or the legacy-based environment within the SETA now, is that you'd obviously have portfolios that then would be externally moderated, and a sample of those would be externally moderated. A similar type of approach would happen on a skills program in relation to that. Now, if we go to the part qualifications and full qualifications and sort of grouping them together, the difference in what I've explained on the skills programs is an element, kind of two parts to it. Is one, the learner would be required to have formative and summative assessments that's conducted by the skills development provider. However, the nuance here is a statement of results would be issued by the skills development provider. However, the final, if I could call it, quality assurance component, for lack of a better way to put it, but the final measure of whether or not that person has obtained that particular qualification and role-based skill set, is they would take a statement of results that has been issued by the skills development provider, and obviously they would need to have be deemed competent by the skills development provider on those statement of results. They would then use that statement of results to apply for what's known as an external integrated summative assessment, where they would take at a registered assessment center or trade test assessment center. So that there in that final assessment at that particular center, provided that they are deemed competent, they would then obtain their relevant based part qualification or qualification. So from an assessment structure perspective, those are kind of the fundamental elements that differ from the legacy-based environment to the occupational-based framework.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And it still sounds like at the heart of the work that the QCTO is doing, the learner is still the central focus of that. Andrea, could you explain the difference between learnerships and skills programs, especially in comparison to what we used to call legacy qualifications and now QCTO qualifications? Is there a major difference?
Not really, certainly not in the idea of it. So previously we would have what we call now a legacy qualification, which is a unit standard based qualification that the SETAs quality assured. We had a range of different qualifications, and some of them were registered learnerships. And in the old system, we could then pull out different unit standards and kind of create our own skills program in the case of some SETAs, or some SETAs would, like QCTO, for example, would offer us a cluster of unit standards and have a registered skills program. Now, that's what we had in the old system. In the new system at the QCTO, we have QCTO occupational certificates, which are full qualifications, and similarly, some of them are registered learnerships. Now, it was understood many years ago that all QCTO qualifications would be registered learnerships because they look a lot like registered learnerships. There's always a workplace component at the QCTO. Be careful, though, because it's not necessarily the case, and one has to check whether your OC, your occupational certificate, is indeed a registered learnership. One of the other key differences, and one that I think we're just getting to grips with now, is at the QCTO we have registered skills programs. Now, these are shorter programs. They can be as short as kind of a few days long, or they could be a month or 2 months or 6 months, like quite substantial skills programs as well. Now, these, unlike before, we cannot mix and match our knowledge modules. We cannot do that anymore. We have to go to the list at the QCTO. And at this stage, last time I checked, there's only 120 options of skills programs, which is very limiting on what we can apply for at this stage. We look forward to much more options in this space as we go forward. But in short, an SDP would apply to be accredited to offer that skills program, and then could offer it like you did before. Another thing to watch out for, though, all the skills programs at the QCTO do indeed have a credit value. They have an NQF level, and they have a curriculum that one would cover both knowledge and practical. However, be careful, because these skills programs at the moment are technically not on the NQF. They are not on the NQF. So you could go to the SACWA website and you will not find the QCTO skills programs as of today. Now, we're told this will change over time, but I think it's a fundamental difference. Those credits that you see in the QCTO skills programs are actually not NQF credits at this stage. So don't be fooled by that. But I think if you go and have a look, there are some very nice skills programs, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they meet the skills gaps that we have in South Africa.
Thank you so much for pointing out those major differences. And I've had a look at some of the skills programs, quite interesting ones as well. Now let's talk money. Matt, is a stipend also relevant with regards to QCTO qualifications, and how will the tax incentives work?
Yeah, so now you're talking my game, Phil.
Yeah.
So it's a good question. Very good question. So, I'm going to take it back to the fundamentals, and if we look at the definition, if you look at the Workplace Learning Program Agreement regulations and legislation, which effectively replaced the learnership regulations of 2007, and they were the Workplace Learning Program Agreement regulation came into effect in 2018. Why I am highlighting that is, if you look at how stipends are calculated, or the minimum wage for learnerships, which is often the colloquial reference point for stipends. If you look at how that's structured, it's structured around the various national qualification framework levels, so the NQF levels. Now, why I go back to the Workplace Learning Program Agreement is because it replaced the learnership regulations, and the Minimum Wage Act is fundamentally driven by the learnership regulation. So that's why I'm linking the two. And why I'm linking the two is that if you look at now what is a definition of a qualification, it also covers a part qualification. Now, why is that relevant? Well, if you look at the QCTO framework, which we've discussed quite in length already, you've got part qualifications and qualifications. Now, why it's the definition is relevant is a part qualification is a qualification, and a qualification is a qualification. I know it sounds like a circular loop or reference in Excel, but that is exactly as per the definition. So what that means is actually from a part qualification side of things is there will be a requirement for a part qualification and a qualification for a learner to enter into a fixed term contract for the duration of that program, as well as a workplace learning program agreement, what many people would understand or maybe sort of reference as a learnership agreement to a degree. So both of those documents would have to be filled out. And as such, what then defines what is the minimum wage, I want to be clear, minimum wage would then would be referenced to the NQF level of that particular qualification. So whether it's a part qualification or full qualification, and it would need to be paid for the duration of the program. And obviously, if the learner drops off, and then they would no longer be paid. But just for the sake of ease of reference, they would need to be paid a minimum of the learnership minimum wage allowance, which is effectively updated every year. And you can essentially Google minimum wage allowance learnerships, and you'll get an understanding of what that is on a monthly or weekly basis. So, that's really what if you look at the adjustments from a QCTO perspective, that's really how they fit in from a minimum wage perspective. The other part you asked about is obviously from a tax side of things. Now, as which is quite interesting, given the context of what I just highlighted from a part qualification and a qualification perspective. So maybe to make it a bit easier is I'm going to focus more on the part qualifications. Let's say a program that is typically could be anywhere between 3 to 6 months, roughly. I mean, there are some that are longer, but I'm just using a broad coverage time frame because it encompasses quite a large variety of the part qualifications. Now, if you look at the part qualifications, most of the part qualifications, not all of them, but most of the part qualifications that have been registered under the QCTO framework is you will find that they have a learnership registration number. Okay. Now, why is that important? Well, in order to qualify for a learnership tax incentive, or essentially what is known as the 12H Income Tax Incentive Act, essentially that alleviation on your income tax in relation to the particular qualification level would determine the amount that you can claim back. But in a nutshell, the part qualification, the fact that it now has a learnership registration number, which is required to be filled in on your IT 180 form, not to get too technical, but that is the form that is required to be filled in for each learner if you are going to claim the income tax incentive on a learnership. Now, the requisite requirement for that is that it must have a SAQA qualification ID. Okay. And then on top of it, it must have a learnership registration number. As already highlighted by Andrea, is that the part qualifications have a SAQA qualification ID. And then there are a numerous amount of them that have a learnership registration number, which is quite different from what would have typically happened under what people would colloquially refer to as a part qualification and legacy, which is very much this skills program. And we've obviously created quite a clear distinction in what was a skills program, what is a skills program. But the point being is that part qualifications, if they've got those elements that I've highlighted, would then be eligible for the learnership tax incentive, which is very different to what we've known in the past. So meaning that if the program would be 3 months, to make it simple, to make a simple example, there's two parts of the learnership tax incentive. There's the commencement allowance, which is prorated over the period of 12 months. Let me be clear. It's prorated over the period of 12 months. And then you have the completion allowance, which is granted at the successful end of the successful completion of that particular part qualification or qualification. So if we go back to that 3-month example, what you would get is if we look at a typical tax incentive based for non-PWD individuals at the level of between sort of 1 and 4, you're looking at a 40,000 Rand taxable deduction on commencement allowance prorated. So that would be effectively 40,000 Rand divided by 12. Okay. And obviously the learner would be eligible for that for each month that they are on the program. So for ease of reference, if the learner is on the program historically for 12 months, then they would be eligible for that full 40,000. And then we spoke about the completion allowance. Now, the completion allowance is granted upon the successful completion of that particular program. Now, I won't get into the definition of a successful completion because it's very much highlighted in the SARS guidelines, and don't want to go too technical, but it's essentially if they have successfully completed and are granted the statement. The statement can, at this point in time, can actually come from the service provider or the skills development provider itself to deem that they have successfully completed, because at this point in time, and obviously it may change with QCTO, but we do know that there is a little bit of backlogs across certain SETAs in relation to be granted the actual statement of results and or certificates. So SARS does then accept the completed or the competency reports of a skills development provider at this point in time for a successful completion. But going back to the example, and I know this is quite a long-winded, and I apologize, but I know a lot of people really want to understand this, is if we look at the 3-month part qualification, what that would mean is that that employer would be eligible for the commencement allowance, and you remember that is prorated over 12 months. So effectively, they would get the commencement allowance for 3 months, and then they would get, so that would be the 40,000 divided by 12 times by 3, which effectively is 10,000. And then they would get the completion allowance, which is the 40,000 Rand. So for that 3-month part qualification, provided it's got the requisite information I shared at the beginning, then would be eligible for a 50,000 Rand deduction on your taxable income. So that is one of the fundamental changes in the environment, and quite an interesting one. So long-winded answer, but there's a lot of information there. I do apologize, but it's quite useful, I think.
Thank you so much, Matt. I know I appreciate it. I appreciate the answers, because the change that's coming our direction, that's currently happening, is definitely impacting everyone, and it's important for us to all know what's happening. I'd like to hear from Andrea if you have any other tips that you'd like to share with us.
Tips in general, or tips about the SETA and the QCTO?
QCTO tips, please.
Oh, okay. I think it depends really where you're coming from. If you're a company in this space, I think getting to know this area like as much as you can, it's definitely going to impact on how you choose your providers, on how you engage with them, who you can engage with, and certainly not all providers have been able to move across to the QCTO space because there are so few options at the QCTO at this stage. So a little bit of sympathy, I think, for SDPs in this environment wouldn't go amiss. There are a lot of barriers and a lot of challenges, and compliance is tricky on any day, but with all of the changes and the lack of options at the QCTO is very tricky at the moment. And so getting to know and understand it so that we can get into it. Both Matt and I are quite excited about the QCTO and the philosophy of it and the way in which we're doing things. And I think that once some of these teething problems are overcome, we're looking forward to a smooth ride. I think, for example, that the external exams at the end of these learnerships is a big shift for all of us. I don't know about you, but it's been many years since I sat in a 3-hour exam, and that kind of sort of exam preparation and pressure is not to be underestimated. Some of the challenges around assessment centers and the costs of the ISA and things like that need to be discussed and accommodated for, especially in funded learnerships like this. And what do we do with learners who don't get through first time and these kinds of things? So yeah, getting to know it, getting to understand it, seeing it for I think what the intention is rather than just the bureaucracy and the challenges is also really key, not only for success but also for sanity. So let's keep our eye on that ball, shall we? I don't know if that answers your question, Paul.
I am answered, and I'm sure everyone is definitely answered on that. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today for the Summit QCTO Insider. We've gained valuable insights from Matt and Andrea about the upcoming changes and considerations regarding QCTO. As we navigate through these adjustments, let's stay informed and proactive in preparing ourselves and our businesses. Until next time, take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.